I'll merge two ideas within the construct of emotional intelligence, specifically regarding effective communication. One, the art of asking questions, and two, the specific roles of power and control in a conversation. To help us better grasp these concepts, we'll explore real-life examples from the workplace, family life, and even the animal kingdom. So whether you're a parent, a leader, a spouse, or partner, or simply someone who wants to build better connections, today's episode will help you understand the importance of emotional intimacy, trust, and the art of thoughtful questioning. Welcome to my podcast on How Not to Retire, a psychological approach to a healthy and wealthy retirement. Episode 33, Power versus Control. Greetings, I'm your host, Dr. Richard Himmer. Let's start by laying out a blueprint for effective communication. It's often said that the one asking the questions is in charge of the conversation, the one conducting the direction of the conversation. But what does that really mean? When we ask questions, we guide the conversation and delegate power to the responder. That power is the power to be authentic, to be right, to be wrong, to be neutral, or even be indifferent. By showing interest in the other person's thoughts, we create a space for them to express themselves freely, without judgment. This is called neutrality, and when you are neutral, it creates a sense of mutual trust and respect, which we call emotional intimacy. Here's the key. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So how do you show someone you care? Well, the answer is by asking thoughtful, genuine, and neutral questions and then listening to their answers. I believe Stephen Covey is credited with the statement that people rarely listen with the intent to understand. My observations are that folks typically don't listen to each other, but instead wait for the opportunity to respond and insert their immaculate perception on the topic. Asking questions is being a TED, someone who is interested. To illustrate, consider conversations you've had with a young child, maybe your grandchildren. Have you noticed, or do you notice that, assuming they feel safe around you, how they interface with you? Young children typically pepper the adult, parent, or grandparent with constant questions, often using the open-ended approach of why. This is an effective and natural way to learn and understand the world around them. Children ask why because they actually want to know the answer. The problem is, the more parents offer unsolicited advice, unsolicited opinions, a plethora of you shoulds and do this, when the kids grow older, especially into their teenage years, curiosity fades altogether, and it's normally replaced by a self-centered focus. When in our teenage years we ask our parents why, we're not asking them to learn something. We're asking them why so we can wear them down. And when a parent starts responding to the whys, the parent loses all leverage. Just a side note or a pro tip, you don't answer a teenager's question why when you know they're not trying to understand why. You need to ask or respond to them with a very effective, open-ended question. You see, teenagers will wear their parents down with the why question, not because they want their wisdom. They have shifted their communication style from learning and being interested to how can I be interesting? They talk a lot about themselves, and they do it with the intent to fit in and to get people to like them because that's what's been modeled to them. And that's really a natural drive for them to want to fit in because we are all hardwired to connect. And because it's a natural process, we don't think much of it. However, sometime in your 20s, if you don't learn effective communication skills and how to go back to being a TED like you were when you were young, you will unintentionally push people away without so much as a clue as to why. Here's an example. Think of Econ 101 from your university days or in your high school days if you were taught economics. And this is where you learned about the concept of supply and demand. Now, the law of elastic and inelastic pricing refers to the idea to how sensitive demand for a product or services can be changed by its price. So in elastic pricing, demand is elastic because a small change in price will lead to a significant change in the demand. And inelastic pricing means that it doesn't matter really what you do to the price, there will always be demand there. I'm telling you that your opinions are not inelastic. They are highly elastic. So think of the economics of someone who has a lot of unsolicited opinions. Their supply is large. Now, using the theory of pricing, when there's a large supply of a commodity, what happens to the price? Right. The high supply gives a low price or value. So the more opinions you have, the lower the demand for said opinions. Now reverse that. If the supply of all these opinions was low, there's at least a probability that there will be some demand. Too many parents find themselves with a plethora of supply and absolutely zero demand from their children to hear what they have to say. That happens with spouses who have oral diarrhea, who constantly talk, vent, loop, criticize, or use sarcasm, condescend. There's no demand for what your thoughts are. There's no demand for all of these opinions. And this is why relationships, especially as they get older, turn to invisible divorces, because at least one of the two has a tremendous supply of their opinions. And because there's no demand, it creates so much friction. It's a hard reality to come to grips with the fact that people really don't care about your opinions. They just don't. It's not because they're mean. It's because they are wrapped up in their own challenges, work, life, perhaps misery, victimhood, that your attempts to relate, to correct, to tell, or to give unsolicited advice, they're not needed, they're not wanted, they're not warranted, and they're not even on the radar screen. You're probably thinking of someone right now that fits this description. Okay, that makes sense. Most people do. But what about the person in the mirror? I explained this once to participants during a sales training class. This would be about 15 plus years ago. And one of the newer recruits was really uncomfortable with my comments. He genuinely believed that people wanted to hear his opinions and that he rarely offered an unsolicited opinion. In other words, in his immaculate perception, people were constantly searching for his wisdom. And in his mind's eye, he believed there was an insufficient supply of his opinions for the demand. There was more demand than supply. Okay, now I would call that an immaculate perception. So we agreed to put my constructs, the claims that I make about that no one really cares, to the test. He agreed he would go for 1 week without offering an unsolicited opinion and then report back to me. Since this was just a one-and-done training, we had to stay in contact with email. Now, most of the other participants, like all of them, were quite bemused with this newbie's confidence. So he agreed to email me when the first person asked him for advice. So 1 week went by, no response. 2 weeks, no response. 3 weeks, no response. 4 weeks, no response. 6 weeks after the training, I received an email confessing that he had not yet been asked for his opinion and that he is now a believer. All right, so let's transition into this idea called power versus control. We've just talked about the importance of asking questions and asking them neutrally. No one cares about your opinions, so keep them to yourself until you're asked. The construct of power versus control is very dynamic. It's crucial to understand how these constructs play out in conversations. Now, in any conversation, there are always two positions, power and control. If they are neutral, the person asking the questions is in control because they are guiding the conversation, not the person. They're controlling the direction of the conversation, but they're delegating and handing over power to the responder. The power comes from the invitation to answer free from judgment, criticism, or mockery. So here's an analogy. Picture having a conversation with a shark while out for a swim. Now, is the shark interested in your thoughts or your safety? True story, Adam Walker learned this lesson firsthand while swimming the Cook Strait in New Zealand as part of his Ocean's 7 mission. While swimming, a great white shark appeared right below him. But in a beautiful twist of fate, a pod of dolphins surrounded Adam, keeping the shark at bay for over an hour. Now, his mission, Adam Walker's mission, was to support whale and dolphin conservation. And it's almost as if the dolphins sensed the connection. This story mirrors how conversations work. When we try to seize power and control, in other words, we ask the question, but then we really don't want their answer. We want to give the answer. It's like swimming with sharks. If you ask a question, but your intent is to really pontificate on the topic, you're far from neutral. It's a communication blind spot, and you're shoving people away. So, have you ever been asked a question only to start answering and then be talked over by the person who initially asked the question? This, as mentioned, is a communication blind spot. It's an addiction to constantly be offering your opinion without being asked for it. Such people are in the must be seen as box, have to be right box, and they typically fear what other people think about them. So they try to act smart and intelligent. They try to fit in. They try to be liked by others. But what they're really doing is pushing everyone away from them. We call this collusion. And they have no idea, no awareness of what's going on. When someone asks a question but doesn't give a neutral space for an answer, well, the other person feels unsafe and trust is lost. We build trust and intimacy when we relinquish power and create safe space, like those dolphins protecting Adam Walker. When you ask a question, it's important to listen to the answer and keep your bias and addictive drive to be seen as smart out of the conversation. It's a supply and demand issue. When your supply of comments, criticisms, relating, sarcasm, and judging hits a certain threshold, demand diminishes and even ceases to exist. You will go metaphorically broke because no one is going to buy your product. And this is why friendships are difficult to come by nowadays. Too many people want to do all the talking, and they don't balance their oral diarrhea with a healthy supply of open-ended, neutral questions that provide a safe space for others and invite them into a healthy relationship. This is so true with parents, leaders, friends, and spouses. Let's bring this idea into the workplace with an example. Harry is a production manager who uses a technique his team calls drive-by delegating. You know, parents do this too. Essentially, Harry drops tasks on his team without seeking input and without any discussion or understanding. Harry is an agreement-seeking missile, and by so doing, he takes both power and control out of the conversation. Harry is the metaphoric shark here. The team feels ignored and disempowered. Perceiving he's doing a good job is alienating all the direct reports. He's dictating instead of building community and eliminating trust and respect in his space. So you kind of get the picture. So what's the result? The team feels like they're swimming in unsafe waters, much like Adam Walker with the white shark. They can't voice their ideas or opinions because Harry is all about control, not collaboration. He doesn't ask questions to understand. He simply demands and reacts. This creates a toxic environment where people disengage. They turn on their metaphoric cloaking devices, hiding from Harry whenever he's around. His behavior is a classic example of someone with a communication blind spot, because in his mind he thinks he's leading, but in reality, he's pushing away and creating distance and mistrust. Just a side note, when dealing with finances during retirement years, if one of the two is the one like Harry, who's doing all of the work, taking all the responsibility without delegating anything to the other person, without understanding what they want, you have created shark bait. You are in a position where you might think you're doing the best thing for, and typically it's male to female, where the male might think he's doing the best thing for the family because he's earned the money, he's delegating, or he's taking care of the money. But golly, opening up the safe after you're dead with a set of instructions on how to handle money when you've never done it in 40 years is not my idea of love. That's not safe space. Okay, so next segment. This is in parenting, and this is about a mother by the name of Courtney who's struggling with her teenage daughter. She feels like the only way to communicate with her daughter is through nagging and criticism. In my experience, I've seen this a lot. A mother, sometimes a father, will come in and say, Doc, it's really the only way I can get through is to nag and yell and scream and sometimes worse. Her daughter's room, one of the things that bugs Courtney, is always messy. Courtney's late for everything. And recently, Courtney's starting to be flippant, kind of back-talking. But here's the thing. Courtney's frustration is understandable, right? Because her daughter's not really obeying, not really being her best self. But Courtney's approach is missing the mark. Instead of fostering emotional intimacy, she's creating more distance. Her daughter doesn't feel safe or understood, so the situation escalates. Courtney, like many parents, has been conditioned to persuade, to be right, and to control the outcome. Notice the unsolicited stuff coming all out again? But in so doing, she's missing the opportunity to build trust, the foundation of any strong relationship, whether it's parenting, marriage, or the workplace. Courtney's story is a reminder that emotional intimacy is about creating safe space for open dialogue, where both parties feel safe to express their thoughts. When you're a teenager, and your parents are still telling you what to do, that means the mom and the dad never taught you the principles when you were young enough so they could delegate through a series of neutral questioning the right response going forward. There isn't a teenager in the world who doesn't want to have a relationship with his or her parents. But when the parents are constantly offering unsolicited opinions, telling the kids what to do with no reach out for power, in other words, the parents are always trying to get both power and control. That doesn't work. Their job is to control the direction and delegate to the teenager the power to answer appropriately and to seek understanding. Remember, this is all about creating trust and respect. And if you want to have safe space, you got to learn how to ask questions. And learn how to ask questions where the person you're asking questions to wants you to ask more questions. The person with the power is the one answering, and they will delegate to you, if you're asking neutral questions, more questions, because they want you to do that. That's safe space for them. They're enjoying this. A critical point in this conversation, and listen to how important this is that a person can never truly say yes until they have the power and the freedom to say no. In sales, if someone's pressuring you to say yes to buy their product, are you really given the power to say no? When a teenager has no choice, they have to do it your way every time. It's your way or the highway. There's no other option. There's no dialogue. Do they ever really have the right to say no? Do you want to know why teenagers rebel against their moms and their dads? They'll tell you they love mom and dad, but they don't trust mom and dad because it's not safe. But you know what? That happens in retirement. That happens with a married couple who typically spend most of their waking time away from each other in the workplace. And then all of a sudden they're together now, and the horrible skills that they learned from their parents or in the workplace or from school or from friends now comes to surface in a constant, because they're always together, whereas before they weren't, and they'd get a little bit of time away from each other. Just use the wife, for example. Wives who say, hey, honey, please go find a job. Get a part-time job. Go find a hobby. But get out of the house every now and then. You're driving me crazy. Because they're no longer, well, this isn't that they're no longer to, they're not creating safe space for each other. So whether you're a parent, whether you're a spouse, whether you're a leader, doesn't really matter. If you're trying to be persuasive without giving the other person the option to disagree, you're not dealing in trust. You're dealing in manipulation. This is why trust is often called the ultimate currency in relationships. Without trust, we cannot build emotional intimacy, which in turn prevents us from having effective communication. Without effective communication, we can't lead, we can't parent, and get this one, we can't even love. Not successfully. When someone feels they can't say no, they become shark bait. They are no longer seen as a person with agency, but rather as someone to be manipulated or controlled. In contrast, when we allow others to say no, we give them the power to say yes. And that's where genuine connection happens. So how do we connect all of this? How do we harness the power of questioning to build better relationships and create spaces of emotional safety? The answer lies in the quality of our questions. As the great philosopher Solomon Ibn Gabirol said, a wise man's question contains half the answer. When we ask thoughtful, open-ended questions, we invite others to share their thoughts, and in turn, we demonstrate our care and interest. Questions like, how do you feel about this? Or, what do you think would be the best approach? Shift the conversation from control to collaboration. The responder feels empowered and trust is built. This is the foundation of effective communication, whether you're leading a team, raising a child, or maintaining a marriage. Asking good questions also helps us avoid the trap of unconscious incompetence, that state where we don't know what we don't know. When we ask meaningful questions, we open ourselves up to learning, growing, and understanding the perspectives of others. So I'm going to finish it up with one last case study. This is about Art, who's coming home one evening after learning that his bonus, on which he'd been counting, did not come through. So he's angry, and this has been building in him as he's driving home. As he blasts through the door, he walks into the family room, and he sees his 16-year-old daughter, Mindy, watching TV, and he loses his cookies and yells at her, "Stop watching TV. That's all you seem to do. If you put in as much time into studying as you do watching TV, your marks would be a heck of a lot better than they are right now." Now, what's going on in Mindy's mind? She's just sitting there. We don't know the real story yet, but this little girl hasn't done anything, and her dad's ire is now taking after him. Is he seeking understanding? No. Is he neutral? No. Does he see his daughter as a human or an object? An object. To which she says, "Gee, Dad, that's not fair. I don't watch that much." Art then interrupting, "Don't tell me I'm not fair," roared the father. "TV's a privilege, not a right. Now get out of here, wash up, and get ready for dinner." Now again, what is going on in that space? Well, you can imagine what's going on with the mother. She hears all this commotion, and his wife, Ellie, comes into the family room and says, "Hey, what's all the noise about? This kid does nothing but watch TV," Art fumes. "Whoa, Art, why are you so angry?" His wife responds to him. Then he explodes. This is funny to me because this happens every time. "I'm not angry. I'm simply irritated by her laziness, and don't contradict me in front of her." How many times have you seen someone angry, pointed it out, and then yelled back, "I'm not angry"? So there is a way to handle that, but telling them they're angry or they're mad isn't one of them. So he says, "Don't contradict me," to which she responds, now it's a he said, she said, "Art, I'm not contradicting you. I'm just trying to understand why you're so upset." He then says, "I told you not to criticize me in front of the children. Can't we have a peaceful dinner in this house?" As a result of this exchange, Mindy stopped watching the television, went upstairs, and did not come down for dinner. Art continued fuming. Ellie, who was hurt and bewildered, ate in silence. So, who was the culprit? Was it the TV? No chance. Was it Mindy watching way too much TV? We don't know. But that's not the issue, is it? Most importantly, what we do know is that Art was unaware of the impact, the disappointment of not getting his bonus had on him. He did not seek understanding. He completely escalated in his emotions and in his communication, neglected the very thing critical in the process, and that is to see the other person as a human. He did not have the capacity to take his emotional temperature and recognize his feelings of anger, bitterness, and disappointment that were completely swirling around him. He also was unaware of how these feelings pushed him to take his anger out and bitterness on his daughter and his wife, most inappropriately. You see, it's not just asking neutral questions. It's knowing what's going on in your world. Is now a good time for you to even talk? So to wrap this up, let's reflect on a couple takeaways from today's episode. Whether you're in a leadership position, navigating parenthood, or trying to strengthen personal relationships, the concepts of power, control, and emotional intimacy are at the heart of successful communication. Remember, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. When they know how much you care, they actually care how much you know. We create environments where trust can grow by asking questions, listening sincerely, and allowing space for others to express themselves. And trust, as we've talked about, is the currency of all meaningful relationships. So think about your communication blueprint as you go about your day. Are you more focused on being interesting, or are you more focused on being interested? A Ted or a ting? Are you creating space where others feel safe to say no, so that their yes truly means yes? As in past episodes, trying harder to connect or to make friends or to repair broken relationships rarely works. It's time to try different. Be a Ted. Ask neutral questions. And actually listen without vomiting your bias and immaculate perceptions all over the person and inadvertently pushing them away. Instead, give one of the greatest gifts anyone can give to another human being. 15 minutes of your undivided, neutral attention, all about them. Until next time, keep your opinions to yourself, which reduces the supply of a product rarely in demand.